Hello everyone. Um, Today I'm very happy to share with you the summary of one of the best books I've ever read on the topic of focus and attention. This is the first book I've read in 2024, and it was such a gripping and eye-opening read, and it is very much relevant in for today's times for everybody. In Scattered Minds, uh, the topic of attention was primarily focused on kids and what are the factors that impact the attention of children. There was a very brief coverage on how attention deficit impacts adults when they grow up, right? But this book, Stolen Focus, is um, very much focused on adults, and it talks about various factors that contribute to lack of attention. And this is a must read, I would say, for everybody. um, so if you are planning to read this book, then I would say, go ahead and purchase the book and read it completely. What I am going to be sharing is a detailed summary, but I would still say I have only covered about 30% of the book. There are various examples and interviews that the author has shared, which are very much aligned with various factors that are being discussed. So let's move on. Uh, Firstly, why this book? Um, when I discussed about Scattered Minds and the various aspects discussed in the book, my husband asked me, um, is there any coverage on how gadgets or devices impact our attention? But in Scattered Minds, I didn't find anything about devices or gadgets usage as such. Then I know this book, Stolen Focus. I came across this title, I think a year back, and it's been there on my wish list for quite some time. So then I thought, okay, after Scattered Minds, it's a good read. So I purchased this book. And as you might have seen in my blog posts, I have been writing about focus and attention um, for the past 3 4 years, and this has always been one of my very important priorities. And I have taken multiple steps to reduce my gadget usage. I've shared some of those steps taken as well. I have also read multiple books on the same subject, like books like Deep Work and Digital Minimalism, written by Cal Newport, um, Indistractable and Hooked, written by Neer Eyal, uh, and how sleep impacts our attention and focus, very beautifully discussed by Matthew Walker in Why We Sleep. There are also other books that talk about focus. Chris Bailey's Hyperfocus is again another great read, and of course, James Clear's Atomic Habits. I also have a couple of other books to read as well on the same topic. Though I have learned about the concept of flow, I'm yet to read the original text written by Mihaly. The other book written by Daniel Goleman on focus, that is also a great book I've heard. I'm yet to read it. So yeah, so this topic is very important, and it has been discussed by various experts on the subject. Um, this book, Stolen Focus, written by Johann Hari, he has beautifully compiled 12 different factors that impact our attention and focus. And each factor is very much relatable. Um, the author's personal experiences in his digital detox journey, and the kind of effects that he faced. Very beautifully explained. I think when you read that book, it is not like he is um, somebody talking from a point of view of a digital detox guru, but he talks more of a relatable person, like what are the kind of issues that he faced, and how did he go about researching this topic by interviewing different experts. So that was a very interesting read. And he is aged 40, and he has experienced life before devices. So um, that angle is very much interesting, because many of us, including me, we have seen how life used to be before smartphones came into existence. So he says that he's a journalist who is tired of being wired. I think many of us will echo the same as well. So yeah, so in terms of the 12 factors, we will go one after another. Before that, let's talk about um, what the author has presented in terms of the context in the introduction chapter. So he talks about his experiences traveling to different places, and he says people are more focused on actually taking selfies or being live on social media when they travel, but they are not actually seeing or feeling the beauty of the tranquil places. They are not really experiencing it. And the other aspect is that we are always switching tasks, right? uh, we are unable to give our complete attention to things that matter, and activities for which we require long time commitment, like reading a book or writing an article, right? Those activities are in decline. So he brings out a very interesting point. He says that why do we check our screens all the time? Because we have this fear of missing out. But he says that by doing that, you are guaranteeing that you are missing out, right? You're missing out on relationships, you're missing out on conversations, you're missing out on nature, you're missing out on family time, you're missing out on so many other aspects that are happening in the real world. So this is how our present lifestyle presents various challenges. So he says that the attention crisis is a real one, and it is an urgent one to be dealt with. He says that we are currently in an attentional pathogenic culture, which means that it is an environment where sustained and deep focus is very hard for most of us. Um, and when we lead a life which is full of distractions, then it's like a life that is the quality of a life, such a life is diminished. And when we are unable to pay sustained attention, then it is very hard to achieve the goals that we want to achieve, because there is like no stillness, there is no space or time to stop and think, right? And when you have like frequent interruptions, it is very hard to get back to the thing that you are focusing on. So research says that it takes about 23 minutes for you to get back to the same state of focus if you are interrupted. Interruptions also impacts our problem solving abilities. Whenever attention breaks down, we tend to make mistakes, there are errors, decisions being made wrong, all those factors come into play. So he goes into details of various aspects. So the author presents the context on what are the challenges uh, because of the fact that we are not able to sustain our attention. And he explains 12 different factors. We'll go over them one by one. The first and foremost is the increase in speed, switching, and filtering. So these three are different in terms of our behavior. So he explains them very beautifully. So the first thing he talks about is speed. He says that um, our gaze currently is currently fixed on things that are fast and temporary, like any sort of social media feed that you look at, right? It is temporary and you are like swiping continuously or scrolling. It is just a fast experience. um, he says that only when we set aside our distractions, we begin to see what exactly we are distracting ourselves from. Maybe it is some uncomfortable feeling, or it is some unwanted thought, or ruminating over past experiences. We are trying to distract ourselves from something, right? Only when we set aside our distractions, we'll exactly know what is bothering us. um, we are actually soaking in so much of information, right? He says that it's actually drinking from a fire hose. And the more information is being pumped, then the less time people can focus on any individual piece of it. We are already seeing that, where there'll be a certain news that will be trending for a day, and after a couple of days people move on to something else, right? So in those 1 or 2 days, there's just so much of information about that incident, or some controversy that keeps circulating. After that, people just move on to the next topic. More speed, less comprehension. So when we are just consuming more information, we are not taking the time to reflect, and there is less comprehension. And in this race for more information, speed, what we are actually sacrificing is depth. Depth requires time, depth requires reflection, energy, and longer time spans. Only then we'll be able to comprehend what is happening. But in today's times, we have sacrificed depth to meet the requirements of speed. And not just that, the great acceleration, right? This is being celebrated today. Working for longer hours, being busy, multitasking, being in that hustle mode, taking up too many projects and too many initiatives at the same time, right? This is all being celebrated. Whereas, uh, in terms of how it impacts our attention, as you can see, slowness nurtures attention, speed shatters it. This is something to keep in mind. So, the author says that when you practice moving at a speed that is compatible with human nature, and you build that into your daily life, then you begin to train your attention and focus. So, the speed with which we are moving, it has to be compatible with our nature. Um, so, so this is something to consider, where at what speed we are um uh, working, what are the things that we are taking up, what is the information that we are consuming, right? The second is switching. So um, multitasking, or doing multiple things at the same time, or switching context within a matter of a few seconds, right? All these are things that have become part and parcel of our working lives today. But the author, based on his interviews with leading experts, he he has pointed out that we are very single minded, and our brain can at the most produce only 1 or 2 thoughts at once. And whenever we are constantly switching, it degrades our ability to focus. When we switch constantly, there are multiple consequences. The first and foremost is the switch cost effect, where whenever you are switching from one task to another, the brain has to reconfigure. So, when you are moving from task A to task B, the brain switches, it reconfigures, and then again, when you come back to task A, again it has to do a bit of reconfiguration. So, this is actually a wasted brain processing time. So you might be spending, say, 3 to 4 hours on something, but when you're constantly switching, you're actually wasting a lot of that time. The second, the author calls this the screw up effect, where because of frequent switching, it increases the chances of errors or mistakes in our work. The third is the creativity drain. So whenever we are switching tasks, whenever we don't give our minds free, undistracted time, we tend to become less and less creative. The fourth is the diminished memory effect. So, when we are constantly switching between tasks and multitasking, at the end of that whole effort, we end up remembering less of what we actually did. So, these are the various consequences of switching. So, this idea of multitasking, this actually came from the logic of machines, right? Multiprocessor. So how do we can't really be living by the logic of the machines. We are humans, we work differently, and we need to be in alignment with this nature. When we are persistently distracted, it can have as bad an effect on our attention as feeling drunk after having alcohol. So he says that this is like the perfect storm of cognitive degradation that we have been facing. So the solution recommended is monotasking, where we focus on one task at a time. If we are always switching, we have seen the consequences of how it affects us. So starting off with say monotasking on a given task for say 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and slowly increasing the time. The third factor to consider is filtering. So the prefrontal cortex of our brain, it filters out all the unwanted stimulus, right? The information coming from the external world, which is absorbed through our senses. So it filters out most of the irrelevant information. So when you are watching a movie, and if you don't hear the traffic noise, you don't hear the neighbor's doorbell, right? All those are like unwanted stimuli which the brain automatically sort of filters out. But he compares this prefrontal cortex to that of a uh, bouncer who feels overwhelmed because he has to now work way harder to keep out all the distractions. So now this prefrontal cortex, which acts like the guard, right? Now he has to like work harder, and he is forced to filter more frantically because there's just too much stimulation coming at any given point. So it becomes overwhelmed, and over a period of time the efficiency of this filtering mechanism starts to deteriorate, and there are unwanted stimuli that starts to trouble us. So this is one cause, the increase in speed, switching, and filtering that hampers our attention and focus. The second is crippling of our flow states. So the author first he talks about um, from a perspective of social media, where he is asking whether we are broadcasting more about ourselves than receiving from others, right? So he says that narcissism is a corruption of attention. It's where your attention becomes turned in only on yourself and your own ego. So is it that and over a period of time what happens is that we start to think that we matter only if more and more people start following us. If we don't receive any of the signals like likes, retweets, comments, shares, etc., then we feel that there is no meaning. Like we want those signals to keep coming in. Only then we feel that people see me, people hear me, and if we don't get those signals, we feel there is an absence of meaning, right? This is how we have been sort of brainwashed into believing. So he says that if we are constantly interrupted in our daily life, then even though there may not be any external interruptions, we start to interrupt ourselves. This happens, right? Like earlier, we would be getting these notifications, the push notifications on your phone, or it could be a vibration, it could be a ping. Um, then you immediately check what that notification is for. But these days, even if you have disabled those notifications, you would still end up checking your phone, right? You will interrupt yourself even when there are no external interruptions coming in. So, this is something to be aware of. He then talks about a certain experiment conducted by B.F. Skinner. So he conducted this experiment on pigeons where the pigeons were being rewarded whenever they do a certain random gesture. So the pigeon starts to learn about this behavior. So if it flaps its left wing, then it gets a certain reward. Then it knows that, okay, whenever I flap my left wing, I am going to be rewarded for that behavior. And once it has learned that behavior, it starts to flap its left wing more and more to get that reward. So this is the reinforcement. So the author says that you and your sense of focus are simply the sum total of all the reinforcements you have ever experienced in your life. So these days we are getting such reinforcements by getting hearts, likes, etc. Right? So then we start to do it more and more obsessively, just like that pigeon. So the author says that that's how social media has sort of tuned us to act like that pigeon, to become obsessively take selfies and share so that we get more hearts and more likes. So Mihaly, he is another psychologist. He has written this popular book titled Flow. So when he learned about this experiment, B.F. Skinner's experiment on pigeons, he wanted to take a different alternative approach. He wanted to understand those human psychology aspects that are positive and nourishing. So he conducted an experiment where he observed a set of painters and their process of producing art. So when these painters were working on their paintings, they were completely focused. They were in a state of hypnotic trance. And after the end, after they have created the painting, they didn't, sit and admire their own painting. They moved on to the next. So they were not really focused on the end result, how it turned out, but it was actually the process of painting in itself that led them to experience that state of hypnotic trance. So this state is what Mihaly calls it as the flow state, and flow state is directly linked to our state of happiness. So the more flow you experience, the better you feel. You might have also observed where if you're totally engrossed in some activity where you don't feel a sense of time, then at the end of it, you feel so alive, you feel so happier, right? So, this is the state which is called as flow. So, in order to get into that state of flow, there are three components that are required. One is there has to be a clearly defined goal. So you can get into a flow state only when you are focused on a single task. So monotasking is very much required. If you are distracted with multiple things or you are multitasking, then you wouldn't experience the state of flow. The second is that the task that you have chosen, the goal that you have chosen has to be meaningful. So we are evolved to pay attention only to those things that are meaningful to us. If we don't find any meaning in the work we do, we will not be able to get into that state of flow. The third and most important is that this task that we are about to do, it should push ourselves to the state of to the edge of our abilities where it is neither too hard nor too easy. So there is a little bit of a challenge, but you don't feel too overwhelmed by it, nor you feel like too easy. So it pushes us to that edge of our comfort zone. Okay, so these are the three requirements for us to get into the state of flow. And if we want to get into if we want to avoid distraction, the first and foremost is to find your flow. So this is something that was also explained very well in one of the chapters in digital minimalism book, where the author says that it is not just enough that you cull down all your distractions, but you also need to identify meaningful activities to pursue during that path, during that time, right? Where um, uh, you it's not like you just take out all distractions away and then you feel like so bored, and then you will eventually end up getting back to all those things that were distracting you in the first place. So we need to strip out our distractions, and at the same time we need to replace them with activities that put us in a state of flow. So the author, Johann Hari, he says that we all have a choice between two profound forces. One is takes us into a state of fragmentation. So at the end of that experience, we feel smaller, shallower, more angrier because we have not accomplished anything worthwhile. The second is a state of flow, where at during the state of flow we feel deeper, we feel calmer, more purposeful, right? So he asks us a question: do we want to be that Skinner's pigeon who who is willing to do anything to get that reward, right? Uh, or do we want to be a Mihali's painter, where we are so engrossed in that activity of painting that time passes by, right? So this is a question that is worth reflecting upon. So flow state is important, and there are many factors that have come in our way that don't help us reach that state of flow because of too many distractions and because of the importance given to multitasking and so on. The third is the rise of physical and mental exhaustion. So here he talks mainly about sleep. Again, this is very much in alignment with the points discussed in the book Why We Sleep. So, if you have read Why We Sleep, then some of the things might feel like repetition. Um, but it is worth understanding how sleep loss affects our attention. So, the longer we are awake, the higher chances that we are going to be losing out on our ability to pay focus and attention. Whenever we are tired, there are certain points where we begin to experience attentional blinks. Attentional blinks are those few seconds where we completely lose attention. This is called as a local sleep, where your eyes are open but you are like, literally sleeping. So, effects of sleep deprivation: adults, whenever they are sleep deprived, they become more drowsy, whereas children would respond by becoming more hyperactive. And if kids are deprived sleep continuously, then attention problems will start to show up. And even when there is a very small amount of sleep loss, negative effects start to kick in. And why this happens is that whenever there is a lack of sleep, the body thinks that we are in a state of emergency. There is something that prevents us from resting. So we are made to be alert, right? So in order to do that, the sympathetic nervous system becomes active, the blood pressure is raised, the hormonal changes start to happen, and it forces us, the body is now um, forced to eat more fast food, so that there's more energy that can be obtained. It increases heart rate. So many other factors start to get initiated whenever there is a lack of sleep. We discussed about the effects of caffeine, and it was very well explained in the Why We Sleep book. So here the author presents a very summarized version, where he says that the adenosine receptors get blocked whenever whenever there is caffeine in the blood. So adenosine is it keeps building up the more we are awake, right? So that is like a signal. So when the adenosine reaches a certain level, then our body automatically gives us the feeling of going to sleep. Now caffeine actually blocks the adenosine receptor. What it means is that by drinking caffeine we feel energetic, but actually we are not giving ourselves more energy. We are just not realizing how empty we are, right, in terms of lacking sleep. So yeah, so this is an important point to consider how caffeine interrupts our sleep. Um, there are various reasons why sleep is important, right? Many of us in today's times think that, oh, sleep is such a waste of time. We are not doing anything, right? We consider it as a waste of resources. But actually, sleep is not a passive process. It is an incredibly active process where many things happen during our sleep. In the deep sleep state, which is the non-REM sleep state, the cerebrospinal fluid, it washes through our brain, it removes all those toxic proteins, it flushes them out and detoxes from the brain, right? Then if this cleaning process, if it isn't done, then it affects our ability to concentrate. And many times people think that, okay, I will, if I don't get sleep, I will take a sleeping pill. But sleeping pill induced sleep is not actually the same as the normal sleep. So sleeping pill is actually a drugged sleep where you're just, you don't, there's nothing much that is happening. Whereas normal regular sleep, there is a lot of processes that happen that really that are helpful in resetting your system. So prefrontal cortex, which is the judgment area of the brain, it is extremely sensitive to sleep loss. So whenever we are not sleeping well, then the decisions or the judgments or the choices that we make, they may not be at the optimum level. The dream sleep, which is the REM sleep, this helps in emotion processing and stress management, where the brain starts to play out the emotional events of the day, but without any emotion attached to it, so that it revisits the scenario. It helps us in processing those emotions better. And the most intense REM period happens around the towards the end of the sleep cycle, which is around the 7 to 8 hour mark. That's why we feel like, we have woken up from a early morning dream, right? So many of us cut down our sleep time to say 5 hours or 6 hours, thinking it is enough. When we do that, this long intense REM sleep, it doesn't happen. The artificial light, that is also an issue which disrupts our sleep. So there is one interesting point the author has shared, where he is spoken about this rush of energy that is released. It's called as a surge of waking drive when the sun is about to set. So this is mainly to help us um, safely return to our tribe, to finish all the things at the end of the day before the uh, sunlight vanishes. So uh, that rush of energy helps us to wind up all the pending tasks. Now, because of artificial lights, this rush of energy comes to us very late into the night when we are switching off the artificial lights. So then we feel like there is a sudden sense of surge of energy around, say, 9:30. So it is best to avoid blue light from screens at least 2 hours before going to bed. And another important point to remember is that we are now exposed to 10 times the amount of artificial light that people were exposed to just 50 years ago. So, the artificial light not just comes from the lighting, but it also comes from our devices, phones, television, and so on. So, all these constant uh, inflow of artificial light, it disrupts our sleep cycle. The author also points out the motives of capitalism, whereby he says that when we are asleep, we are not producing anything, we are not consuming anything, we are not spending money. So it is, bad on the economy. So our economic system has become very much dependent on depriving people of sleep.